in this kind of like music business, music industry, different things. I was, well, management company. I'm doing kind of like looking for new artists, more in the pop music world, actually. Management, record companies, publishing, distributors. And then I worked at a record shop for a while, and that really kind of like changed my tastes in music. I started, this is like in the 80s, sort of like mid-80s, I suppose, 83, 84. And I started listening to a lot of roots music, really, including American music and blues and jazz and Zydeco, Cajun, Irish traditional music. And in about 1986, I think it was, I actually started a record shop. And this was the time that, you know, like that, the term sort of world music became kind of a little bit known. And it was sort of like coined in London. And we became a specialist in this world music. I mean, mainly sold African music and Latin music and some Asian music, but mostly actually it was from India or Pakistan, South Asia. Not much from East Asia, just a few traditional things, maybe a gamelan record or two, Japanese koto, for example. So I was very much interested in different music from around the world, especially music that has some sort of roots and traditions to it. But I was also interested in what was happening today in those countries, what, you know, musicians were doing, maybe taking their traditions and creating new music with those traditions, which was quite a lot of what this world music was about. It was more sort of like not strictly traditional music, but more popular music from that country. So anyway, in 89 it was, I had a chance to go to Japan. So I was going to a city called Kumamoto, which is in Kyushu, which is the southern island of there are four big islands, main islands of Japan, and this is the southern one called Kyushu. And I had a friend of mine was running a magazine called fRoots magazine. His name's Ian Anderson. I saw him before I went to Japan, and he said, "I'll give you a couple of we've got a couple of subscribers in Japan." So he wrote down the names and the addresses of these two subscribers to this fRoots magazine. And I didn't really think much of it, but yeah, I took it with me. So anyway, I got to Japan and I looked at these addresses and I realised that actually they were in the same prefecture as I was going to. So it was a big coincidence because Kumamoto and Kyushu is not Tokyo. It's it's quite rural compared to, you know, the big cities. I mean, Kumamoto itself is still quite a big city, but it's relatively anyway a rural area. So it was quite a coincidence. So I got on a bus at Kumamoto station, and because these two addresses were right out, actually very rural areas in a place called Aso, which is known for a volcano, and it's like the largest caldera in the world of a volcano. So anyway, I got on a bus. I must have just asked I don't know what I did, to be honest, but I must have asked the bus driver, showed him something, and like anyway, the next thing is perhaps about 2 hours later, I arrived at a place called Uchinomaki in Aso, and I still didn't really know. I couldn't speak any Japanese, but I had a phone number. So I made a phone call, and I was actually just about 1 minute away from this record shop. So one of the subscribers owned a record shop. So anyway, somehow he managed to understand me, my English, and the next thing he arrived and took me to his shop. So he was very, very surprised, and he knew the other subscriber who also lived. He ran a mail order record store called Tambourine, and he mainly sold British and Irish folk music. So anyway, they couldn't believe that someone had come from England who had subscribed to this fRoots magazine and was there in this shop, and like. But I was, of course, I'm interested in music, and as you know, from different parts of the world, including from Japan. Actually, one thing I should say is as well that when it comes to Okinawa, the first thing that I had sort of become aware of, also because of fRoots magazine, the editor had been given a cassette, I think it was, of Okinawan music, and it was a record by Shokichi Kina and Cham Blues called Bloodline, which featured Rai Kuda and was actually recorded in Hawaii. So I knew about this record, but you couldn't buy it in England. So I wanted to buy this record by Shokichi Kina, but also I wanted to ask, well, what else would you recommend, kind of like folky, but maybe quite new? And so they recommended, so the other guy from the, he also came to the shop, so there were two of them now, and they were recommending a few things. There was a Japanese minyo singer, actually, called Takio Ito, who sung traditional minyo, which is folk music, but was incorporating all of these sort of jazz sounds and a little bit rocky, and he was just becoming a little bit known. It just signed to Sony Records, so his new record was out on Sony, and maybe this kind of attitude or this sort of world music had just about begun to enter Japan, and musicians probably were thinking, well, what's our world music? And I think that Takio Ito was one of those. So the rest of my trip, I kind of found out more and more about different types of music that I might like. Musicians such as Haruomi Hosono I was recommended, who had also recorded some Okinawan music, actually. Even Ryuichi Sakamoto had as well. But so I begun to sort of like discover more about Okinawan and Japanese music, and realised that actually there's a lot of really great music from that part of the world, but nobody in England had heard of any of this at all. So on the way back, I was there for about 6 weeks. I did quite a lot of research, bought loads of stuff, and on the way back on the airplane, I thought, I wonder if I could well, we'll sell some of this in England through this record store. And in fact, I brought so many. I went to some of the big record stores in London, like HMV and Virgin, because I had sort of 3 or 4 copies of some things, and they said, yeah, we'll take it. What is this? There was at that time, a real sort of thirst for new sounds from around the world, and it was like, we'll take it. And they sold it. And so I was thinking, maybe I can make a business of this, actually, just selling this. So in the spring of the following year, so only about 3 months later, I sold my part of the business to my partner at the record shop, and decided to go to Japan. Exactly what I was going to do still was slightly, or how I was going to do this, I wasn't quite sure. But anyway, through the record shop in Aso, Mr. Iwami, Naoyuki Iwami, we made an arrangement where I would just buy records from him, and he had accounts, of course, with all the record distributors and everything. And so I made catalogues, mail order catalogues, and I actually had a mailing list, because also in London we also sold records mail order. So I just took that same mailing list of about 1,000 people, I think it was, and sent out catalogues to all of these people saying, here's I think probably in the first catalogue there might have been about 50 records, something like that, and I gave quite a lot of background. I would write about each one. So in fact, the very first record was this Shokichi Kina record, Bloodline. I think the second record in it was another group from Okinawa who were popular at the time, called Rinken Band. And then the third record was a group called Nenes, who were on an independent label, also from Okinawa. And then I had Japanese things.
Why was all this Okinawa music so popular?
Well, because what was happening in Japan follows very closely what's happening in other countries. And so this world music kind of scene that was happening in the UK was influencing music, or influencing musicians in Japan. And not only musicians, but record stores suddenly had sort of world music sections, and maybe some distributors started importing CDs mainly from a few of these record labels in the UK or in Germany and some in America who had started releasing this kind of record. Labels like Globe Style, Hannibal, World Circuit, and maybe and as I say, some from America too. So there was a kind of a growing interest in music, in world music. But as I say, some musicians also who had been influenced or had grown up maybe with traditions, but maybe they played more American music or British music or Western music, suddenly thought, well, can I incorporate my traditions into this music, into new styles? But in fact, it had been happening naturally in Japan for years before, like groups like Haruomi Hosono, and in Okinawa, traditional music, had always been combined with all sorts of other styles of music, soul, jazz, rock, for years and years. So it already existed. So what I did actually, I think it was possibly before I started selling the music though, what I did do was especially this musician Shokichi Kina had kind of gone missing. So even in Japan, he was sort of, people didn't really know, he hadn't made a record for quite a long time. And he was a bit of a sort of a mythical kind of figure. So I thought, well, I'm going to go to Okinawa and try and meet him. So I had some leads, and I did manage to track him down. And I went on it was a New Year, and he was playing this festival, and he had just started to kind of decide to come back into making music. And I spent probably like 3 days with him, something like that, and met all of his family, and he had a manager as well. I interviewed him for this fRoots magazine, and although I'd written a few things, I'd never interviewed a musician and sort of written a full article about them. But I thought, well, I'll do that with Shokichi Kina because people wanted to know about him, not only actually in the UK or like the fRoots magazine again, but even in Japan, people didn't know much about him. So it was a strange experience, though, because he's kind of like, he was talking about this festival, and it was going to bring it kind of world peace. He had very, very big ideas about himself and his music, and then he told me that the night before he'd been visited by spirits of John Lennon and Bob Marley, and he said, and they told me that I have to do this festival. So I was like, God, what's the next question? So anyway, I did manage to do an interview.
How was your Japanese, or was his English good?
So this was being translated. My Japanese wasn't good at all. We were sitting in a car, actually, most of the time, and his manager was translating between him, and he spoke he speaks, even now, I would find it really quite difficult to understand. He speaks very, very quickly, and in Okinawan sort of language and accent. But anyway, I did manage to do an interview, and then that got published in fRoots magazine. And again, people started asking me about the music, and people would write, and I'd already sent out some of these mail order catalogues, and it kind of just snowballed a bit from there. I had quite a lot of customers in California, for example, and quite a lot of second-generation Okinawans as well would write to me, and suddenly they would be able to order some Okinawa music CDs that they hadn't even thought they'd had a chance to ever buy unless they went to Japan or go to Okinawa. So there was quite a lot of interest. And then I was also interested, though, not just in Okinawa and Japan, but in other countries too. So I included music from Indonesia, from Thailand, Malaysia, and other kind of East Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries too. And then in the following kind of few years, I would go to Okinawa quite often to sort of research. And then I met this group, Nenes, as well. And I wrote about them. That ended up on the front cover of fRoots magazine. And again, people were there was a kind of a growing interest in the music from Okinawa. So we're sort of talking about early 90s now. And that spread quite quickly, actually, at the beginning. And, quite a lot of other musicians as well became interested in the music of Okinawa. So I think around maybe about a year or two later, like Nenes went to the UK and played some concerts, and lots of quite famous musicians came and saw them and wanted to, and some collaborated with them too, so, and over the years they did. So there was quite a kind of quite a buzz about Okinawa music. Like Shokichi Kina, he went to London, he played in London. So did Rinken Band. So there was a kind of that was like the first interest in Okinawan music, especially from what I was seeing in UK and in Europe, as part of this kind of world music scene. And yeah, it was very, very different times, as I say, because there was no kind of real searching on the internet, and there was nothing like that really. So, and maybe there was more of budget from these different festivals to sort of fly people over from Japan or Okinawa and play at some festival, which doesn't happen so much these days.
Yeah.
So that was it really. And then I just kind of continued to do that. And then in 93, I think it was, I moved to Tokyo. And then I kind of expanded. I worked with some record companies. Yeah, I mean, working really kind of exporting some of their music they were making, but also working with some of the artists. And then I worked with this group called The Boom, who had this big, within Japan, really popularized Okinawa music with this single called Shimouta, which became a million-selling single. And that really changed perception of Okinawa music in Japan, because they were like a young rock band. They're not from Okinawa, but they went down to Okinawa, recorded the video in Okinawa, and as I say, this became Shimouta did sort of change, got into the kind of the mainstream, whereas Okinawan music might have been, some people might have known about it. I'm talking sort of like people in Japan, usual people in Japan. They suddenly could hear it on TV or in the shop when they went shopping, this single, Shimouta. And then I worked with The Boom, and the singer, Miyazawa, we started a radio show together. He did 1 hour and I did 1 hour. And then quite a lot of that was focused around Okinawa music. And then later we went on tour as well to Europe, and he went to Brazil and different places with The Boom. So that was quite good too. I enjoyed all of that.
What was Rai Cooder like? How did he hear about Shokichi Kina, and how did they end up collaborating?
I think there was a producer called Makoto Kubota who knew him, and he knew him, and I think he asked him to come to play on this record. So I think it was through him. And from, I've heard sort of quite a lot of stories about all of this, how it happened, but, Rai Cooder, I don't think he had heard much Okinawa music before, or, like me, really. That was like the first thing he had heard. It was like Shokichi Kina, or that he had been introduced to. But he played on, some of the tracks, and there's one of the tracks, Hana, he does, a beautiful solo, and it's quite, you can tell straight away, that's Rai Cooder. And again, that helped to popularize Shokichi Kina a little bit in other countries, because Rai Cooder was playing on it, and so Rai Cooder fans would be trying to seek out this record, that he was involved in, that they couldn't buy. But it's still a classic, that album called Bloodline. That was actually Shokichi's second album.
Yeah, Rai Cooder, he's been so influential. I mean, even with Hawaiian Slack Key, he collaborated, I think, with Gabi Pahinui in Hawaii.
He did. That's another classic record. That's right.
Yeah.
And then also I think it was about 93, 94, he also was on the Nenes record as well.
Oh.
So they They also went to Okinawa and recorded there, and Raikuda was a guest. So yeah, he's done a few, at least a couple of Okinawan things back at, say, quite early on. So 1980, and then again in about 93, 94, I think it was. Yeah, he played with Nenes. I was going to say, having some figure like that to help popularise the music also helps, actually. It's and people. Yeah, people. Oh, Raikuda's on this. It sort of piques their interest anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I really got into a lot of Hawaiian slack key at the time, and yeah, a lot of these, I guess, non-native artists, even with like George Winston here in Hawaii, he really popularized the slack key guitar. On his Dancing Cat label, he released so many slack key albums.
So talking about George Winston, he was actually a very, very early customer of mine. So he would buy everything that I sold. So I'd list it, and literally he would just buy everything. And he came to Japan and to Okinawa too. So I met him. I stayed in touch with him. He was actually quite popular in Japan. He'd come and play concerts in Tokyo, quite big halls. But he'd always go down to Okinawa as well for a little bit of, even if he wasn't playing live. So I did get to know him. But yeah, he was a big Okinawan music fan.
Really?
He loved it.
Wow.
But yeah. He was literally, he had everything, and he really devoured it. He was a thirst for knowledge about it. But there was other musicians too, not just him, who really wanted to know about Okinawan music, like another sort of piano or classical player in the UK, actually, Michael Nyman. He went to Okinawa, and he collaborated actually with some Okinawan musicians as well. He did a soundtrack to some films. So yeah, there's a lot of musicians who like Okinawan music. But yeah, George Winston, unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, which was a great shame, because we used to, when I was living in Japan, I would meet him probably about once a year, because he would come and play concerts. He would do like a little Asian tour. But sometimes we would send emails to each other, and also through his office at Dancing Cat. But yeah, unfortunately, he passed away. Yeah, not so long ago.
Yeah, I really wish he had produced a lot more Okinawan music, because I really like his production on the slack key stuff. He really like isolated just the musician and the guitar, and I just really appreciated just the simplicity of that production. I wish he had done that with
Yeah,
Okinawan music as well.
yeah. I think that it's, in a way, it was being done. It's being done in Okinawa. And there's lots of record labels. Hawaiian music is also very popular in Japan. So a record label who releases a lot of Okinawan music also releases a lot of Hawaiian music and recordings of Dancing Cat too. So even in Japan, Slack Key Guitar and Dancing Cat label are pretty popular. Hawaiian music, I know we had this sort of Gabi Bahinui and Raikuda project, which got some interest and popularity. But like in the UK, and in Europe, Hawaiian music isn't that well known compared to Japan, where it's there are like hula schools everywhere, and like it's a really big thing, actually. And there's quite a big connection between Okinawa and Japan. I mean, between Hawaii and Okinawa too. A lot of, so I think that that helps. And Hawaiian Okinawan collaborations. In fact, there's quite a few of those too.
Okay. Yeah, so why don't, with all your experience, I mean, who do you consider, I guess, the legends in Okinawan music that people should listen to if they want to get started with Okinawan music?
So I suppose going back in time, the people who are sort of legends, in that they're not around anymore. So I'm sort of like talking really sort of like maybe pre-war, but were probably more popular after the war. Were people like Rincho Karikaru, for example, Seiji Noborikawa, Misako Shiro, who's a female singer. But if you go before that as well, though, there's some fantastic musicians. I mean, I think in sort of going back to like the 19 sort of 20s and 30s, there was a lot of Okinawan music recorded. And I think at one point, apparently, there were about 50 independent labels recording music in Okinawa. The famous ones are like Marufuku Records. Someone called Choki Fukuhara started that, and then his son, Sunio Fukuhara, continued it. So there's always so much sort of like a big local scene happening, which really just happens in Okinawa and didn't really reach even mainland of Japan unless people went to Okinawa and actually brought the music back with them. So I think that they're the sort of, the legends from that period, and several more really. And then it's interesting really, but even so during the 70s, Victor Records in Japan recorded a lot of these famous musicians in a very sort of traditional setting, but at the same time local labels were releasing Okinawa music kind of with a kind of like a minyo folk feel, but with all kinds of different influences, and they were releasing them on singles, on 45s, and you can buy some of those now, those compilation albums, and it offers a totally different feel of what Okinawa music. It's, I suppose the interesting thing is that in Japan, some of these traditions are kind of like preserved, and it's like you have to do it this way. You can't do it any other way. Like I actually studied shakuhachi, bamboo flute, and I was kind of told I had to play it this way. You have to do that. That when you're studying, and a lot of people just stick to those traditions. Whereas in Okinawa, I think that the tradition has always been a kind of like a living tradition. It's always been evolving. No one thinks you have to play this way. You can't do it any other way. So whatever the influences which were coming from outside of in other countries were always incorporated into Okinawan music. And of course, you have the American bases there, the military bases. And they brought all their music with them, so that Okinawan musicians would hear all this music, and actually some of them would go and play on the bases too. And they would be playing blues and jazz, but they were also playing sanshin, the Okinawan tradition instrument. And then they combined all of these things, and that's where you get all these incredible kind of mixtures. And that mixture is called champlu, actually, the word, like chokichikina and champlus, it's a mixture, and that word champlu, it's for food as well. Has always been there. So you had that in the 60s, 70s, and then, as I say, in this world music time, when that started, you had groups like Shokichikina, Rinkenban, Nenes, and Tetsu Daikuhiru from the Yayama Islands, and many more. But that tradition, or that sort of creating new music with Okinawan traditions, is still there today, with like dance music and DJs and rap and whatever it is. There's always something. It's remarkable, really, but there's always something new and interesting happening. I know someone who runs a live club in Okinawa, and he gave me he released it on like I think it was like it was a few years ago now. I think it was on like a little SD card that you put in your computer, and there was like 100 different artists on it that he'd released, and and the quality of all these 100 artists doing all sorts of music was astounding, really, just from a small island. So many musicians and so many styles. So I'm sort of in awe, in a way, of Okinawa and the creativity of the musicians.
Yeah, I think it just has something to do with the island, and I don't know, maybe just the indigenous tradition, but it's really similar in Hawaii as well. Just there's so many musicians here in Hawaii. You
Yeah,
can you can go to so many small little places and you just hear great musicians. It's pretty amazing.
yeah. Now I've been to Hawaii actually to make recordings as well. So I listened to some music, and yeah, I got there is a sort of a similar kind of feeling, Okinawa and Hawaii, and I think that in Okinawa also, they were under occupation of America, of Japan and China, and it's kind of like seafaring nation battling for it, for control of it. So they've got influences from Pacific, they've got influences from Indonesia, and it fits in with their scale. So that's another reason that they can do all these collaborations. It's because their pentatonic scale fits in with like the Indonesian scale, for example, whereas the Japanese one is completely different. And they play in a major scale, whereas Japanese traditional music is in a minor scale, and it's kind of more happy, kind of upbeat. So yeah, no, there are definitely, as I say, a lot of connections. And I was actually there with, Bob Brosman came and made a record.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I actually introduced him to the record label, and he made a record with a guy called Takashi Hideyasu, who was part of Shokichi Kina's group. And we went to an island called Takitomi Island, which is a tiny island, but very, very, very traditional. It has traditional houses. And the record company hired out one of these traditional houses, brought in all this studio equipment, and recorded this album in about 3 days, maybe, something like that, in Takitomi. And that had Hawaiian, Okinawan sound to it as well. But the other thing about Okinawan music is that actually the songs themselves, the traditional songs, are really great. So this album that Bob Brosman made with Takashi Hideyasu was all traditional children's songs. But the melodies and the song of the songs are all just so great that anybody can listen to them and just enjoy it as well. It's, yeah. So that's another great thing about Okinawan music.
Yeah, Bob Brosman is another one. He also collaborated with a lot of Slack Key people too in Hawaii. Yeah, it's Ryan Cooder and Bob Brosman. Yeah, both of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I met Takashi
Oh, you did?
Hirayasu. I don't know when. It must have been 15 years ago, maybe, when they came to the volcano area on the Big Island, and they played a concert. Yeah, I just talked with him a little bit, but I had no interest really at that time in Okinawan music. I just thought it was an interesting concert to go to. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, I went with them around Europe, and I went to Canada. They played some festivals, and then they made a second record in California as well. So yeah, I was quite involved with that. Yeah, and he's still playing.
Is he still he's still playing, recording
Takashi,
things as well?
Takashi,
Yeah,
yes, yeah. Takashi is.
because Bob Brosman, he passed away, right? I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
but Takashi is still playing them and still collaborating with different artists. Like he's made a record with some Taiwanese musicians. He's got kind of a connection with that. So yeah, no, he's doing all right.
Wow. So you were mentioning earlier that some of the really early Okinawan music, how different it sounded, maybe from the folk music that we hear now. Can we still buy some of that music, or where can people find it?
Yeah, I mean, so these 1975 recordings that I mentioned, which are traditional, you can buy those.
But how about like the 1920s, or those?
Yeah, there's much less of that. I know you're interested in this Okinawa Gaku Soran series.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that is not available. That was at the moment. That was recorded by, I think it was Columbia Records actually in the 1960s, and I think they kind of like field recordings. They went around to different parts of Okinawa. I think what happens is that these kind of big record companies like Columbia, like JVC or Victor Records or King Records, over the years they've gone and made recordings in Okinawa. They've released them sometimes like individually as CDs, or sometimes as or a long time ago maybe as LPs, and then maybe repackage them as CDs, often as a kind of like a limited edition. And then it sells out, and then nobody can buy it, or there's just very few. And I think you have to sort of wait for those recordings to be reissued. Maybe it needs somebody else to sort of say, oh, let's reissue a new box set. The thing is that, like in other parts of the world, CDs are still popular in Japan, actually, compared to other countries. Nevertheless, to make kind of like a box set costs quite a lot of money. and then they press 1,000, and then I suppose they sell those. So maybe we have to wait for something like that to happen again, because I think it probably will happen, because they've got all these. I'm talking about the major records companies here. They've got all these recordings that they're just sitting on, but on the other hand, they've got like million selling stuff that they're more concerned about, rather than releasing something quite minor that they might sell 1,000 of or something like that. It's a shame, but yeah. But there are some local, like Campus Records, for example, is another independent label in Okinawa. They've got some nice compilations of stuff from the 60s. That's all available. But as I say, that sort of like really early stuff, not so much. There was a box set released, might have been just last year actually, called Okinawa Music and Memories, which is I think it's 5 or 6 CDs, and it comes with a book, massive book, and it's an incredible thing actually. And on that, there are some 1920s recordings by Choki Fukuhara, and it's a real kind of, there really is everything on that. I think it goes back to the 1920s, almost right up until the present day, with different stuff. It's expensive, but it's a nice thing. Yeah, it's called Okinawa Music and Memory. So maybe that's the kind of the thing that's got. So it's got like Shokichi Kina. I think it might have Nenes on it. I can't remember exactly, but it's got a real sort of range of music anyway, including some of these really old recordings, maybe some of the first recordings of Okinawan traditional music that we might hear.
Do you have that on the Far Side Music?
Oh yeah,
site?
yeah. Yes. A few people have bought it. The shame about it actually is that there's no English notes, so there's a huge amount of information in Japanese, and I think I've had to have I had to do this? I can't remember now. I might have had to have translated all of the track list or written it in English, the whole of the track list, so people know exactly what they're listening to, because that nothing more frustrating than like, everything is in Japanese you don't even know. So anyway, I've written that all on my website anyway, so people, when they buy it, at least they know what they're listening to.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, that is good. Yeah.
What is his name? Makoto Kubota?
Yeah, Makoto Kubota, yeah.
So what is his role? Because it seems like he's recorded a lot of Okinawan music, but he's Japanese, right?
Yeah, he's Japanese. So he heard Shokichi Kina, his sort of like hit single in Okinawa in the 70s called Haisō-San, and he did a cover version of that in Japan. He recorded it on his albums, I think in the late 70s, I think it was. So actually, the album was called Hawaii Champroo. I don't know if you ever come across that album, Makoto Kubota the Sunset Gang. It's called Hawaii Champroo. So again, recorded in Hawaii. And he's done a lot of different things. When he was recording kind of like rock music, a lot of sort of like Cajun New Orleans collaborations he did. For a while, he was producing Indonesian music as well. He went to Indonesia, and that's when I met him the first time. Really, was when he was doing Indonesian recordings. And then he went to Miyako Island, and he made some recordings with these very old women, and was part of a film that was made as well about sort of like, so it's like lost traditions in Miyako Island, another small island, and he's released he's made then some other kind of like field recordings, and then done some sort of remixes of old recordings, and so he's always doing something a little, quite interesting, something new. Yeah, and then someone you actually mentioned to me, Hariku Yamaku. I think he worked with him a little bit as well. Actually, I think he asked him to do some remixes on a record, and then Hariku Yamaku then has made his own record with some of these six sort of adding things to these 60s recordings on that Okinawa Ongaku Soran.
That's such a great CD. I love that. I love that CD.
It is good. Yeah. So as I say, there's always this mixture going on, and it's a kind of a small world in a way. Like you asked about this Chiyoshima Navigator, so they're also kind of two DJs And then they played with this musician called Kaneko Horyuchi. Yeah, she's great too, actually. So she's actually from Hokkaido. She's not from Okinawa, but she lived in Okinawa and she studied under one of the greats, Misako Oshiro. And she's very, very up to any kind of like new collaboration. So she did this Chirashima Navigator. She's recorded an album with an African musician. And she came to London, actually, and I arranged a concert when she played with this is Sierra Leone palm wine music. And, so she's really up to different collaborations, very kind of like open-minded. And so she's, I think that, she's sort of like part of that scene.
Yeah, I just got to meet her maybe a few months ago. She played at the Okinawan festival in Honolulu.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to her because she was so busy. But yeah, I got to talk to her for just a little bit. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, I like her. I really enjoy her music and everything.
Oh, okay. Excellent. She was just playing solo, was she?
No, she was playing with two other people. I can't remember what the band name was. But yeah, I just happened to just recognize her name and face from Churashima Navigator. And
I see. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because she joined them. She was part of them as well. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, she was great. I mean, as a performer and everything, it
Good.
was really nice.
Yeah. No, I say she played in Portugal. She did like a showcase, but yeah, no, it was good. I know she's played in some festivals in, was it Colombia? I think she went to quite recently. But anyway, yeah. So she's. I'm waiting for her second album.
Were you involved with the collaboration that she did with that African musician?
So she's I don't know which musician you're talking about actually, but she.
I think it was an African musician.
Okay,
I'm
so
not
she's
sure.
done lots of collaborations. So there is someone
Yeah.
who lives in Tokyo, who's from Mali, called Mamadou Doumbia, who plays guitar and kora. And I know she's collaborated with him. And Mamadou Doumbia is someone I did know when I was in Tokyo, and I kind of worked with him as well, actually. In fact, we went to Europe as well. So maybe it was him. But there's quite a lot of passing musicians going through Okinawa who have heard about Okinawa, who want to play, from Spain. And so someone like her would be suggested as somebody to collaborate with at a live concert, for example. So I think that's probably why. Perhaps it was that. I'm not quite sure. And then there are other really great musicians. You asked me about Mutsumi Aragaki.
Oh yeah. So how is she? Do you folks like help produce her records, or like what is your relationship with her?
Yeah, so I think she got in touch with me, actually. This is before she got quite a long time before she made the record, and she was doing these kind of jazz kind of avant-garde recordings, but I thought she was really, really great. So I think I kind of like promoted her a little bit with people at the BBC who I knew and some people in Japan. But it's been great watching her sort of develop and what she's been doing. And she made this, really great first album. And she came to Europe. So yeah, I did sort of like help her with that. She did like showcases, and she's been playing in different parts of the world, taking her. But she's also part of playing with different sort of, again, so very, very open-minded when it comes to collaborations with different musicians. So yeah, no, she's great too. Yeah. I mean, she's a great sanchin player, but very, very creative and very brave. And she has great visuals at her concert and puts such a lot of work into it. And yeah, I mean, it's it's not just sitting there playing sanshin, which is the banjo lute-like instrument and the singing, but there's so many new things she puts into it, and she's a great lover actually of the old 20s, 30s, 40s Okinawan music. She sent me actually loads and loads of old recordings from Okinawa that she had got hold of.
Wow.
Yeah, so no, that's the other thing, is that these musicians like her, they've got a real respect for the past, as well. She really knows a lot about the history and sort of delving back into it, and as I say, real respect, but at the same time, quite brave to sort of like take that same music and do something completely new with it. It's yes, I really admire her for doing that.
So Mutsumi Aragaki, yeah, I mean, that last album that she released, I really like that album as well.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved with her?
I think she actually got in touch with me first, and this was quite a long time ago, quite a few years before she made that first record. And really, she was sort of, I suppose, promoting herself. And as I say, I kind of like introduced her to various people, both actually in Japan and here, and trying to make something happen for her. But she made that record really on her own, released it by herself, this first album, and she did, and she did a great job with all these sort of visuals that go with it that she played at the concerts. And then I've kind of like kept in touch with her since then. So I suppose it's more of a advisor, and like if she's playing some concert, she'll ask me to have a look over at the contract and make sure everything looks okay and that kind of thing. If she gets offers, to play concerts, that kind of thing.
She's Okinawan though. Is
Yeah,
that
she
correct?
is. Yes, she is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, she is.
Okay. Wow. Just going back to some of the old legends that you talked about,
Yeah.
Seiji Noborikawa.
Yeah.
I really like his music as well. Did he ever get more attention, or what was his story?
Yeah, so I think he was a sort of he also didn't conform with any sort of traditions in Okinawa, and his voice is kind of like not sung. It's not you don't really feel that this is a sort of a traditional singing voice, and he wouldn't wear kind of like Okinawan kimono. He'd be dressed in a suit and quite a character really. And he didn't actually make many records in the sort of like 50s and 60s. There was some, like on this Victor 75, they recorded really all of the great musicians in a very traditional studio setting, and he was one of those. He was one of those musicians. And then I think it was about 98. He recorded an album for a record label in Tokyo, who had also released albums by Nenes, actually, the very first one, but also were very, very involved in Okinawan music. And that was maybe that was the first time, I would say, quite a lot of Japanese people had heard Seiji Noborikawa. And then there's a rock group in Osaka called Soulflower Union, and they are they're very political, and they are interested in sort of like old Okinawan songs, which they played acoustically. And actually, there was an earthquake in Kobe in 1995, and they couldn't play electric. They wanted to go and play for the people, the victims there, and sort of just cheer them up, really. So they started a kind of an acoustic version of their group called Soulflower Mononoke Summit. And from that, they would play very old tunes from Japan, like 1920s, 1930s, and also from Okinawa. And they later collaborated with Seiji Noborikawa. And the singer from Soulflower Union produced Seiji Noborikawa's next record, and then they would sort of like add sort of rock things to it. He was a real character, and then he was actually in a film called Nabi's Love, Nabi no Koi, which became a little bit of a hit in Japan, and so people heard and saw Seiji Noborikawa and sort of what a great character he was. So probably, although he was active as a musician from sort of 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, I think it was actually when he was in his 70s, when he was like his most prolific, and when he was more known to general public and in Japan too. And I think a lot of it is it's his sort of his sort of character, his image. He would wear like a hat and like and I know he drank a lot and just but a real character. So unfortunately, he also passed away. Nearly all these great musicians, I say, have sort of passed away in the sort of 90s, 2000s. But he's it's because some of these musicians have got quite a legacy of music, like Rincho Kadikaru, whereas Seiji Noborikawa has less of a body of work. It's more sort of recent stuff that you can listen to. But yeah, no, he's great too.
Yeah, he reminds me of like those old blues singers. I think they redid one of his albums, and they kind of copied like I think like like a John Lee Hooker album cover. And
That's right, Howlin' Wolf. That was the first
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that was the first one, 1998. That came out. That was his kind of first album he'd recorded for like years and years, and that was the kind of the image is that he's this old blues guy. It's a
Yeah.
similar
Yeah.
thing. He's sort of like unearthing this guy who's been in Okinawa. That's right. Yes, exactly. That is it. Yeah, Howlin' Wolf, Seiji Noborikawa. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, such an iconic cover.
Yeah. And the music also has that sort of bluesy feeling. Yeah. That's right.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, he's another one, another great musician.
Maybe talk about that. I picked up that album from Far Side Music, the songs and prayers from the Izaiho ritual. Yeah, maybe talk about that one, because when I listened to that album, that was like so different. that that
Well,
that was a really interesting album.
yeah, I mean, music from different islands, and if you go back, like so, for example, some of these kind of like really famous Okinawan tunes, maybe from like Yayama, you go back 100 years, or maybe a bit more. But in fact, there was no sanshin in it, no instrument. It was just pure vocals, and it's like working songs and call and response and that kind of thing, like in Yayama. So that's the kind of the origin of some of these folk songs. But that record that you're talking about there is recorded on an island called Kudaku. And it's kind of like called Island of the God. And I think the legend is this is where the Okinawan people originated. I'm sure it's not true, but that's the kind of legend. And then this ritual is for only for women, and it happens every 12 years. And so the record that you bought, I think it was recorded in 1978, and this actually will probably be the last recording of it, because now there's not enough women to perform this ritual, because they have to, I think they're between the ages of 30 and 40, or 41 maybe, and this ritual is meant to them passing or transitioning into sort of celestial beings, and it's only women, and there's simply not enough women now for them to continue this tradition. So this record was, as I say, it was made in 78. And I think 12 years before then, there was a film made as well of it, which I've never seen it. But there is a film that perhaps you can dig it out. Actually, I should look for it. I think it is shown, actually, sometimes, of this ritual. But as you say, it's another side, another completely different tradition in Okinawa. I mean, there's so many, there's so many different islands with their own traditions, their own songs, their own. I know we've got the sort of the main Okinawan island, but once you go to Miyako and these sort of Yayama islands, and which are further to the west, it's the music is quite different. They've got their own traditions, their own styles, which is all developed in isolation. So yeah. But that is a really interesting record. That one, I agree with you. That's
Yeah, I mean, it sounded just so ancient, and like you said, with the call and response, it was just so different,
yeah,
from
yeah,
like
that
the
yeah,
typical music that you hear.
yeah, exactly. Yes, I mean there's also court music, which is also quite different. That really is much more traditional and doesn't change as much. But I don't know if you've heard the court music, but
Yeah, I'm not. I have a really hard time just getting into some of the court music.
yeah, it's a harder
I
listen,
don't.
isn't it?
Yeah, I don't resonate as well with some of the court music.
Yeah, yeah. But it might be worth it might be worth persevering a little bit, a little bit.
Well, actually, just this past weekend, we had just an Okinawan workshop, and somebody gave me this box album set of records. It's a King from King
Okay.
that. Yeah, so I have this box set
Oh wow.
of album. Yeah, I don't even know what's on it. I have to translate it because I can't read Japanese. So, but I'm hoping I can just like digitize everything, and then
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear what that is. Actually, yeah, excellent, excellent. And is that court music? Do you think? Oh, you don't know what it is?
it's a mix. Somebody translated a little bit. I think it's some of it is court music, some of it is folk music. Yeah, I think it's just a whole mix of things. Yeah,
Okay.
it'll be interesting to listen to.
Okay, yeah. There's like quite an interesting story happened. There's a guy, and I get people who are maybe second generation Okinawan, or they're living in America, and maybe their mother or often grandmother or grandfather was Okinawan, and they've lost touch with their family. Someone got in touch with me, and his uncle was one of the great court musicians of Okinawan music. Playing this Okinawan. So he asked me if I could put him in touch with him. So anyway, eventually I did manage to track him down, this musician in Okinawa, got his address, and I think he wrote to him, and he sent him the sanshin, and now he's playing the sanshin, and he's kind of doing that. But it's and I think actually his father maybe was American. His mother was Japanese. His father was in the American military, but he had been living in America and just lost total touch with any connection to his Okinawan, his family, his mother's side. And it was quite a big thing for him as well, so to sort of reconnect to his family. It's amazing, actually, how many Okinawan. I've got in Hawaii too customers with Okinawan names, so I can recognise them just from their name. Shimabukuro, for example, it's a very
Yeah.
Okinawan name, but they're living in Hawaii or in California, and quite often they tell me, oh, I've given this to my mother. She hasn't heard this music. Yeah, no, I like that sort of connection that people have in America, especially in America, with Okinawa, and customers who are kind of like buying things and saying that either they heard this when they were very young, or they've given it to their grandmother and she hasn't heard this music for a number of years. I mean, I love hearing those sort of tales. It's a real sort of connection with people and music, and giving them some sort of joy and connection with the past. And yeah, no, it's wonderful to hear that, actually.
Yeah, I think the person that gave it to me, she's probably second generation Okinawan, and she just had this box set sitting around somewhere, and she just gave it to me. So I was like, "Oh, thank you." Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I guess we talked about like some of the legends. So who's pushing or who's carrying the Okinawan torch right now, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a young singer. I think she's probably 24, maybe, called Saya. Have you come across her at all?
Yeah, I think I read your review about her
Okay,
because she collaborated with Mutsumi Aragaki and Hariku Yamaku, right, or something
that's
like
right.
that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So she's doing something again. She's sort of like pushing the boundaries a little bit, doing her own thing. She's living in Tokyo, I think, but she's seems to be playing quite regularly in concerts, doing kind of like DJ things. And as I say, she's quite young. There's Awich. Have you heard of her at all? She's doing kind of
Yes.
like
Yeah.
sort
Hmm.
of like hip hop and rap and that kind of thing. And she's I met her actually. Wow, she was like completely unknown. That must have been about 6-7 years ago in Okinawa, maybe, I don't know, maybe more. But and so she was just sort of like starting out and was asking advice and everything. And I've kind of just noticed, oh wow, she's doing really well now. That's brilliant. So she's doing well, and I that sort of Okinawan mixture with sort of like hip hop DJ styles, dance music. It's been around for quite a long time, but what they're doing is feels very sort of like now, very current. So yeah, no, that I mean, I like her too. I think that she seems to be really good, and she seems to be doing something. She seems to be quite popular as well, and rich too. Making some sort of difference. But I'm sure that if I went to Okinawa now, I would discover some sort of new musician I hadn't heard of, or it's there's so many, and there's some who are definitely sort of like operating in the underground. Like there's this guy called Wataru Kosaka who has been to India, and he's got this project called Ryukyu India, which is also really interesting. And he's done this sort of like gamelan, Indonesian gamelan. He's played with that. Again, just doing something completely different that you just wouldn't think about, really. There's just so much. There's an American guy as well who's doing something quite interesting. Okinawa, I think it's called Okinawa Americana. I don't know. Have you ever come across that? It's kind of like bluesy stuff, and his wife is Okinawan. He's playing kind of like slide guitar and kind of quite rocky, stuff, but quite interesting. It's it's good. There's always something new. Anyway, as I say, one of my friends runs one of the probably the main club for sort of avant-garde, something a little bit weird Okinawan music. Not just playing for the tourists, because some of these musicians play. They're called like shimuta bars in the main kind of drag of Naha, and a lot of it is for for tourists who come from Japan, but from China and Korea, and they play the best known songs, best known Okinawan songs like Shimuta and Hana and Haisayoji-san and etc. And they listen and eating dinner, that kind of thing. But there's a club that does really experimental music, and there's always something interesting going on. Just seems like almost every single night at his place. And as I say, he gave me this card with like 100 different artists on it. It was this extraordinary, really.
Well, what is that? What is the name of that club?
You know what? I've forgotten now. What is it called?
Oh no.
I'd have to think. I
Okay.
can't remember. He's actually a bass player, and so he plays with some of these. He plays with them, and he does little different tours.
Yeah, if you think about it, let me know. I'm really curious. Whenever I make my next trip back to Okinawa, yeah, I'll like to check it out.
Yeah. Like Aragaki, for example, Mutsumi, she plays there quite regularly for different collaborations. It seems like it's quite, who's here tonight? Okay, we'll do this and we'll do that. It's just sort of, But yeah, no, good.
Wow. Is there anywhere else in Okinawa that you'd recommend people go to listen to music?
Well, actually, so these days it's still quite worth going, maybe, but these Shimuta bars is the main place that you would go and you would hear music. You could sometimes see quite well-known musician playing, as I say, the sort of the main standard Okinawan folk music. Unfortunately, it's not like it used to be. Like in the 90s, it was much more. There were no tourists, and I like with the Nenes one, for example. When I first went there, I was the only one there until about 1 a.m, and then someone else arrived. Some drunk Okinawan guy arrived, But they're still playing some music. They've got a stage and they play there. There's a musician called Ganiko Yoriko. She had a bar, but I think a lot of them have gone now, unfortunately. So it's harder to find sort of. There's not so much kind of like hidden music in some bar out of the way kind of thing. compared to, I mean, now it seems like those places just don't exist, unfortunately, which is a shame.
Yeah, I was just in Okinawa maybe 6 months ago.
Oh, were you? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been to Okinawa twice, but yeah, I think a lot of the Shimauta bars in the Heiwadori area are very touristy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
You know, and it's just like you pay money and listen to this, and you eat Okinawan food and stuff, and then you go. You know, but yeah, it's a shame, really. But they have to make money as well. These people.
So I guess talk maybe a little bit about Farside Radio. Are you still doing that?
Yeah. 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 Yes. Yes.
How does that work? Or is it when do you put out the music, or what's the I guess the whole format?
Yeah, well, actually, I started in Japan actually. With I mentioned before with this group called the Boom and the singer called Miyazawa Kazufumi, and it was called Far East Radio, Kyokuto Radio back then, and it was on some FM stations in Japan, and that was when I first started doing radio from about I think it was about 97 or something like that. And I used to have quite a lot of, or both of us actually, used to have quite a lot of guests from Okinawa and played quite a lot of Okinawan music. And then when I came back to London, it was 2001. So actually, it was actually through a kind of an Okinawan connection, really. There's a guy called Yasukatsu Oshima, who's another great Okinawan musician, who I kind of like worked with when I was in Japan. And he played in London and did a tour I think it was in 2001 actually, called Japanorama, which went around the whole of the UK. And he was the kind of the Okinawan guy. And the people who ran that started a radio station which was called Resonance. It still is called Resonance 104.4 FM. So anyway, I started a radio show with them. The first one I did, I think, was in 2002, and I've been doing it like ever since. So I just did it yesterday, actually. I don't play, of course, I play Okinawan music too, but I play lots of other things, and I've had quite a lot of guests coming from Okinawa over the years, and I basically play records. Apart from during the time that we had all the lockdowns and everything, we lost the studio. So we've only just got a proper studio back, so I can once again invite guests. But before that, just playing records. It could be old, new, absolutely anything. I enjoy that actually, and it also kind of like forces me to keep up with music and what's happening and new releases and everything like that. So I've kind of got my ear to the ground about what's happening. Not just Okinawa music, but I'm trying to everywhere. So yeah, I still do that once a week.
Oh, is it so? It's a weekly show.
It's a weekly show, yeah, every week, and it's on FM in London, 104.4, and then it's on digital radio, and it goes to a few other cities in London.
Is everything archived?
Yeah, I mean, so I've got my show. I've got quite a lot of it archived, and since I've been putting on something called Mixcloud. I don't know if you know that, but before that, I used to just do it myself on just put an MP3 track on my website. But these days, it's on something called Mixcloud, and you listen to it on there, or you can listen to it on there. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So I've got quite a lot of archive of old shows and that. Yeah.
So is there any particular Okinawan themed show that you would recommend people listen to?
You know, I've been done so many over the years. I don't. I mean, actually, so for example, talking about that. Do you remember I talked about the Okinawa music and memories?
Yes.
So I did a show on that. That was during the lockdown
Okay.
period. Just sort of playing a few tracks. I noticed that the only reason is that yesterday I noticed that I'd put part 1, and then I did it in was it last year? Or the year before, I can't remember, and I've never done a part 2. So I was thinking, oh, I forgot about doing part 2. I should do a part 2 sometime.
Okay.
So I was thinking, I will do part 2 in the upcoming weeks. I'll do a part 2 because
Okay.
I think this is 5 or 6 CDs, and the show is only an hour, so I could only play probably 10 tracks, and I've probably got about, I don't know how many tracks actually. I don't know, close to 100 probably, something like that on this box set. So I've got enough for part 2. So I will do that. But I do like it when musicians come from Okinawa and play. There's been several over the years. I mean, Mutsumi has been a guest.
Oh wow!
Kaneko Horiuchi has been a guest. I mean, there's been a lot of guests over the years from Okinawa. So, in fact, those are in a way my favourite shows. Is when I have a guest and they come and play and we talk, and I always enjoy those shows a lot. But
wow.
Yeah. And now I've got a nice studio again in London, so that next lot can come along, because I haven't been able to do that for a while.
Wow. Well, I guess is there anything else you want to talk about regarding Okinawan music?
No, not really. No. I mean, you could of course check out farsidemusic.com and find a lot of Okinawan records on there. I mean, there's just so much over the years. There's compilations. I've done quite a few compilations. I did something called the Rough Guide to the Music of Okinawa, which was one of the first compilations of Okinawan music, really. Since then, there's like loads of them, but it was still a good record. And then it became quite popular in Japan as well, actually, although it was released in the UK.
Is that on the Far Side Music site as well?
It is, yeah, called Rough Guide to the Music of Okinawa, and that was a bit of a shock in a way to Japan, because there'd never been a compilation quite with all different types of music on it of Okinawa music. So probably it sold more in Japan than it did in UK or Europe or whatever. Yeah, no, there's as I said, there's always something interesting. Another thing, like people have been inspired to go and travel to Okinawa, listening to my radio show. Like there's some guy who went to Amami Island. He heard some music and now he's gone to, and he's going there. He's been there sort of 2 or 3 times. So it's nice to sort of hear about that kind of experiences. And people turned on to music of Okinawa or Amami Island. There's another. I don't know. Have you heard music of Amami?
Yeah, I think Amami. When they play the Sanshin, they play it with that little chopstick thing.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different, isn't it? Yeah. It's kind of like halfway between Japanese and Okinawan music, in a way, traditionally. But some great singers from there. And in a way, it's kind of kept its sort of local feel as well, compared to Okinawa, which is these days so many tourists from, as I say, from Japan, China, Korea, all going there. It's kept that sort of more of a local feel, and the music is a little bit more of a local feel about it, rather than the tourists coming. As a tourist, it's not like that. So it's quite nice. Yeah, and some great singers.
Yeah, I've never been to Amami. I like to go at some point. I've only been to Okinawa Island and Yaeyama.
Oh, you went to a Yaeyama?
Yeah, just those 2.
Excellent.
But yeah, on my next trip, I'll have to check out maybe some of the other islands and definitely listen to a lot more music.
So how did you get into Okinawa and Okinawan music?
Well, I am Okinawan, but growing up, I never heard.
Both of your parents are from Okinawa.
My great grandparents are from Okinawa.
Okay.
Yeah, so but they never played any. I never heard Okinawan music growing up. I've only got into Okinawan music maybe in the last couple of years, so.
And what happened? How did you get into it?
Okinawan music?
Yeah.
Probably through this group called Ukwanshin Kabudan. They do a lot of Okinawan workshops and a lot of art, dance and sanshin. So I attempted to learn the sanshin.
Okay.
and I'm still learning. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I had a really hard time just resonating with some of the court music, and I just wanted to listen to other. I just want to figure out, what else is out there, and yeah. So I started listening to other types of Okinawan music, and yeah, it's been interesting.
And obviously, you feel that connection then because of your family history.
Yes.
That's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, plus growing up in Hawaii too. I mean, Okinawa and Hawaii have so many similarities, as
Yeah,
like you said, as far as being a kind of a taken over kingdom, So
yeah,
there's a lot of similarities.
yeah, definitely. Can I just ask you actually? So I've got some customers who like Hawaiian music, so I sell Hawaiian music too. But I have trouble finding Hawaiian music on CD in
On
Hawaii.
CD.
Are there places you can buy CDs of Hawaiian music?
I don't know. I mean, I can't even think of hardly any. Oh, there are. There's a Hawaiian website. I mean, I think it's called mele.com or something, maybe something
Oh
like
no,
that.
that's out of business now.
Oh, they're out of business now.
Yeah, they stopped.
Oh.
I think I used to buy from them. Yeah, there's a few. There was a couple of websites that I would sometimes buy from, but not anymore. So nearly all of my Hawaiian music that I buy comes from Japan.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
nearly all of it. I can't hardly find any, and I mean a sort of like physical product from Hawaii anymore. And it doesn't even seem to be made onto CD. They're not, everything is on download. So they have these awards, like the Hoku Awards, and so just now someone's asked me to find, we've got some requests, I think, some of these winners or nominees for this. But when I search for it, it's all nobody's actually got an actual album out. So album of the year isn't actually an album; it's just some download.
Yeah, I don't know. We can get a physical product anymore.
Wow, I see. Because there used to be, I mean, like I remember when I was in Hawaii, even just like going to Tower Records. There's quite a lot of
Oh,
records.
yeah, when Tower Records is around, you could buy a lot of that stuff. But yeah, once Tower Records, Borders, and all those places closed.
So so there isn't anywhere. Because I was thinking, there must be someone somewhere selling some Okinawan music, I mean Hawaiian music in Hawaii.
Yeah, I can't think of any like really big record shops that are still around.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it?
It
Because
is.
people want to collect something, own something physical. They don't necessarily want to just have a download on their computer. It's not the same kind of connection, or streaming on Spotify. They do want to buy something. So, as I say, just about everything comes from Japan now. Everything. It's like Japan is
Yeah.
much more Hawaii music there than there is in Hawaii. Of the
I'm surprised that the Japanese still are into CDs.
No, they are very much, yeah. And collectors want to buy something, you know. So it's a shame, but there you go.
Well, if I hear about a major record shop in Hawaii, I'll let you know. I'll let you
Let me
know.
know. I was thinking, I'd buy some. I'm sure I could buy something from them, but so it's a shame. And these are people who've been collecting Hawaiian records for years and years, and suddenly there's nothing.
Oh wow!
Maybe it's all the same all over America. I don't know. Or if it's
It's not like that in the UK. I mean, how is it in the UK?
well, we've got record shops. You know,
Record shop. There's a lot of record shops still.
yeah. I mean, there's like independent record shops. Sort of vinyl is the main thing for a lot of people, but you still find people selling CDs. Obviously, not like it was maybe, but yeah, Hawaii seems particularly kind of like not a lot. It's a shame.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't know that Mele.com was no longer in business.
yeah. And there was another one as well, actually. Hawaii, I don't know, like Hawaiian music or something, and I don't think they're operating. But the Melee, I used to occasionally buy something from them, Melee.com. Yeah, but I think they said we're going to be opening again, but they never did. So, what a shame.
Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate
No,
your
thank you very much.
time, and
Enjoyed it.
I've learned so much, and I'm sure that the people listening to this we'll gain a lot more appreciation about Okinawan music and a good background, at least to start from.
Okay, excellent. I hope so.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for talking.
Okay, all right, bye-bye. Cheers. If you loved today's episode, we'd greatly appreciate your support. Please consider making a small donation at donorbox.org/Luchu Nation. Your contribution helps us continue creating great content for you. Nifē dēbiru.